With us for most of the hour. What a pleasure it is to welcome once again Shudufhadzo Musida, who not only, of course, has the title of former Miss South Africa, of course. This is a mouthful. Can I read this one?
Read that business card, Doc.
Here we go. Here's the business card for Shudu. Here we go. United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency Regional Chairperson. That's one of the big things that you're involved with at the moment. So it's all got to do, Shudu, Africa's Agenda 2063. Call me a pessimist if I'm being unfair. I always seem to get a sense that these agendas and these frameworks get kicked out by decades. We're now talking 2063.
Yeah.
That's a long way away.
It was 2030 at some point.
It was 2030, I think 2040. That's a long way away to get real change in. Why do you think it's been pushed out so far?
You know, I heard an interesting stat yesterday that it's going to take 300 years to reach gender equality. I was in a panel and they said that, and I was shocked. But if you look at how basically the conversation that we've been having, how it needs all stakeholders in the community and society to be involved for that to happen, and no one can be left behind, because this is these are organizations putting forward goals that need to be attained, but those are just organizations. There's 8 billion of us. And imagine if all 8 billion of us actually put forward our best foot into making a change. It takes one person, and you multiply that by 8 billion to make a change. But we can't expect only a few to make a change. It needs all of us to be involved. It's a collaborative effort. So I think the goals are there to guide us. But ultimately, we as a community, we as a society, 8 billion of us means 8 billion possibilities. So I think they keep getting pushed out because maybe that's where voices like mine come in, bringing awareness to the fact that things like this actually exist. Because I don't know if people know that these agendas, the SDGs, organizations like the UNFPA, they don't understand, or they don't know the work that they do. And I can be the first to say that I had to learn. Until you're exposed to those things, until you are given information about those things, you will never know. So I think it's so important to have conversations like this on platforms like this about the different initiatives and campaigns and work that's being done in order to ensure gender equality, in order to ensure the human rights, not only of women and girls, but all individuals on this earth.
Absolutely. And I think, going back to your point around how each one of the 8 billion can make a change, it starts with yourself first before you can impart that change into someone else. But your mental health needs to be checked. It needs to be in the right space. But also that feeds into your triggers and your traumas and how you grew up and your background and healing from that. Let's take it back to Hamasia for Shudufhadzo. How did you grow up? Because that then informs us of, you know, what shaped you to be the woman that you are today, what you've overcome, your obstacles. How was upbringing like for you?
I think I always think about my bringing as a blessing. You know, I was raised with, like in my family growing up, we didn't have much, but there was so much love. And my grandmother was the type of woman who, with the little that she had, I mean, she was earning social grant. She would try to take care of us, but also take care of those around us. And I would watch that. I mean, like, I was 6 years old, and we had a neighbor next to us, and she was a young girl who was taking care of her 2 brothers. So she would come over to the house, my grandmother's house, almost every day. She'd sit with us and eat with us as family, and that's how I knew community and family to be like, not only blood, but our community as well. So she'd come in, my grandmother would help where she could. And then years later, I'm having a conversation with my cousin. She says, do you know that girl who lives next door to us? Do you know that there's some days where she doesn't go to school because she doesn't have sanitary pads? And on days where she has to write tests, she has to use a newspaper. And when I'd hear that, like I think I was 9, I was like, what? Because those are the things that we don't think about, because even the people that aren't as privileged, even those little things such as sanitary pads are still privilege for a lot of people who don't have. And I remember I was about 9 years old, and I promised myself that I wanted to build a beautiful haven with white walls and a blue roof where women and children could come and receive help. Because it was mostly the women and children in my community that were victims of gender-based violence, that were victims of many diseases because we didn't have information about it. They didn't know. I didn't even know about sexual and reproductive health until I got to like grade 7. And this is information that needs to be readily available, and making sure that even children as young as 7 get a seat at the table, especially girl children. Like we were speaking about how people don't know, especially women and girls, don't know about their human rights.
Right.
But growing up without seeing those things and seeing all the social injustices, seeing the abuse that women and children had to go through, seeing the poverty and a range of other issues growing up, I knew that when I grew up, I wanted to lead a life of service. And I've known this since I was 9 years old.
I want to circle back a little bit later to this mental health issue, if you don't mind, when we come back again in a couple of minutes from now, because I would imagine when there's a stigma attached to mental health, it's left untreated. There's ignorance around mental health. It can become a crisis quite quickly. Maybe we are at a crisis point already. Maybe we aren't. We'll talk about that later if you don't mind. But I'm curious, because I think it's now the second or third time where you've spoken about how children don't know, and especially girls, don't know what their basic human rights are. Could we not see a focus on what human rights are at a school level? Get them at the school.
ECD is so important. I mean, I've sat down with many stakeholders about getting at least mental health education into the education curriculum, because there is a gap for it. But human rights as well, that's not something that's taught, and it needs to be that ECD level. Imagine waiting until you're like 17 to just know what your... Like, you get the Bill of Rights, but you don't really get what your human rights are.
Right.
You don't know what you're entitled to as a human being. And I think teaching that from a young age, like when I say no one can be left behind, children are so smart. They're so intelligent. I have, you know, my book, Shudufhadzo Musida, but when I read to them and I ask them, what have you learned? You realize that they know so much more than what we think. We're trying to protect them, but the world is so big. As soon as they leave your house, there's so many things that they're going to learn outside of you. So why do we not spend time actually feeding their minds with useful information? Information about their human rights, information about their mental health, information about these conversations that we're having. But I think we try to shield them so much. But when you look at how COVID and everything happened, we couldn't shield them from that. So the anxiety, the lack of exposure to their peers, you know. I read an interesting stat that said children that started school during the COVID period have speech problems, you know. So there's no way of shielding them from any of this. So why do we not engage with them? Obviously, like in the right way for their age group, but like, why do we not engage with them and give them the information that they need to empower them?
Information is so powerful.
Information is so powerful.
So key, especially because you're also almost, as an adult, especially if you're a parent, fighting against fake news and all the information that young children are already exposed to on social media. The right information from the right source is also equally important.
Yeah, I think maybe you just made a good point. I didn't think of it. Maybe that was my fault. Not just this sort of discussion at a school level, but from parents. Parents can also teach their kids. Caregivers. I was ignorant in that point, not raising that. But we're going to come back to the mental health a little bit later. You know, I just wanted to just talk about the ECD while we had a chance there. But we're going to continue our conversation. Shudu going to be with us for most of the hour again in a couple of minutes from now. Shudufhadzo Musida.